how do we move people who are sort of furthest from being entrepreneurial to that place where, you know, they can actually start up their own business.
Yeah. I think a lot of it's to do with attitude as well. Not the attitude necessarily of the individual, but the attitude of the society.
Right.
You know, how do we view failure? So I think, you know, we have to individually and as a society, I believe, have a different attitude towards failures, which I would say is learning opportunities rather than failure. You know, it's not just a question of sort of coming up with an idea and saying, oh, it'll be on the marketplace next week. It does require a lot of hard work in doing the preparation beforehand in terms of saying, so, you know, who is my customer? Where is my market? Who else is working within that sphere? You know, why would people buy from them, or why would people buy from me and not from them? Being able to sort of say, well, where am I going to get that funding? How much is it going to cost? I mean, some of the ideas that people might have are going to be really workable and useful. Others then, you know, you might think, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, sort of years ago, I thought I was going to invent windscreen wipers for glasses. Well, yeah, great, you know, but you know, who's going to buy it? How can you actually get them made? Changed significantly, so we're much more dependent upon individuals, small businesses coming up with ideas, some of which will take off. I think things like, for example, the AU vodka experience is just amazing how that's flourished and got a global presence. But there will be, it's a pyramid, isn't it? Of, you know, whilst you have those organisations and businesses who've done really, really well, there will be many others who are doing well, supporting that and below that in terms of, you know, not able to have necessarily a national or international presence, but certainly having an impact upon what's going on here.
And welcome to another episode of the Welsh Dream Podcast, where we are bringing you loads of inspiration, talking about various topics to do with innovation and success right here in Wales. Today we're tackling a really important topic, which is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is the heart of what the Welsh Dream is all about. And to help us navigate this topic, we've got a very special guest. So someone who has dedicated basically his life to community service and to just supporting people basically in the community. So we've got Mike Day.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. So Mike was the Lord Mayor for Swansea in the year 2022 to 2023, and he's been a councillor for Swansea Council as well since 1999, and he's had loads of experience working both in business and in education. So we're really thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thank you for making the time.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So I guess to start off with, I would be keen to hearing more about yourself, especially what has motivated you to do all the work that you've done over the years.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously being of a certain age, I've got lots of experience and I could go on for ages, but briefly, you know, my career was 14 years in local government, working in Cardiff, and then moved to Swansea. And I was working at what is now University of Wales, Trinity St David, for 14 years in the business and management area, including Dean of the Business School, and being able to support local businesses through the training and consultancy activities as much as supporting students in developing their careers. And then in the early 2000s, I moved to Swansea University and was looking after business incubation space there, which was a great joy because we were able to see how businesses could be supported through academia and government intervention. And those were focused on digital technologies and life science areas. So I officially retired in 2013 and then started a new business, creating links between UK colleges and universities and Chinese universities and colleges, with the idea of taking staff and courses out to China rather than bringing students over. But you know, certainly as far as my whole kind of heart and passion is concerned, it's very much about developing people and take great joy and delight in seeing people develop as individuals and being able to fulfill their potential.
I think that's excellent, and I think it really shines through in everything that you've done. Again, people being at the heart of that. So I'd be keen on exploring more how you see entrepreneurship helping people develop, basically.
Yeah, basically, I think one of the things that we've discovered as far as entrepreneurship is concerned is that people have got an innate creative ability. And I think sometimes we are ignorant and don't really see the potential that can be drawn out of individuals in terms of that creativity. I'm not suggesting that everybody through entrepreneurship training should set up their own business, because everybody in employment, self-employment, voluntary activities, charitable work, whatever aspects of their lives, they need to be able to draw upon a creative aspect and be able to solve problems, which we all face on a daily basis maybe sometimes. So I think it's a little an area which hasn't required or seen a lot of attention, but something that we can be drawing out. So I think that's why I see sort of entrepreneurship and the development of enterprise skills in individuals as being important, because those tend to be life skills. The whole area of creativity, communication, problem solving, leadership, teamwork, whatever aspect of entrepreneurship you focus on, you do need those skills and abilities and competences in everyday life. So I think sometimes we've maybe focused on academic achievements, which is all right and good and proper, but there is a need also to recognise that not all youngsters in particular are going to be wanting to or be fulfilled through an academic career. Going on to university, doing degrees, masters, PhDs is suitable for some people, but for others they need to see the opportunities of expressing themselves in different areas.
I think that's very interesting, because I think a lot of the time people think entrepreneurship is this scary thing, it's this big thing, and there's a certain type of person that has to be an entrepreneur. But I guess from what you're saying, it's literally just about the skills that literally all of us can learn, and I think that's very important.
It is, and I think it's true to say that there are some people who would be naturally entrepreneurial, and it's great to be able to kind of help with supporting them in developing that aspect. For others, then, as we've said, that they're not all going to be setting up businesses. They're not all going to be the Zuckerbergs and Elon Musks of the world. But we are looking for people who are able to, within their own context, find fulfilment in developing their own potential.
No, I think that's spot on. So you've done quite a bit of work in terms of fostering youth entrepreneurship and all of that. So do you want to speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably sort of comes back to my sort of interest in seeing people develop, but also a question, I think, of saying, well, if we're going to get people in the workforce who've got these skills and competences that we talked about, where is that going to begin? So in 2004, when I was first appointed as Cabinet Member for Education for Swansea, I recognised that there were different people working at different levels, and while we were focusing on universities and colleges in terms of the development of entrepreneurial skills among students, we needed to think in terms of going downstream, if I could call it like that, and to say, how can we be developing a whole structure where people at primary school level can also be starting to develop their creative skills. Do you know, Kim, it's fascinating. I mean, I've looked at some work by psychologists, and what they've said is that when we're at 25, and many years ago for me, but when we're at 25...
I'm thinking, is it too late?
It's never too late to be entrepreneurial. When we're 25, we're only about as 5% creative as we were at the age of 5.
Right.
I mean, if you look at children, the way in which they play, the ideas that they come up with...
And it just comes, exactly. It just continues to flow.
It does.
Yeah.
And, from that point of view, it's sort of saying, so what's happening between the ages of 5 and 25? Is the education system actually forcing people into, there's only one way of solving this problem? Is there only one way of, dealing with this piece of work? When we're doing examinations and assessments... you've got a specimen answer, and if you don't match that,
exactly.
I'll just give you one kind of lovely example I had of somebody who was being entrepreneurial in their exam, and they were asked in their examination paper, give us an example of courage. And he wrote on the exam paper, "This is," got up and walked out of the exam room. I don't know whether he passed or not.
Well, the current structure he did not pass.
But there's something that we need to be doing in terms of sort of looking at ways in which we can be developing those sort of or encouraging people to maintain or continue to use the kind of innate creative abilities that we all have.
And how do you think that can actually be practically done then?
So I think there are two ways. I mean, one of the things that I do like about the new Wales curriculum is the fact that it does involve a kind of a laying out of purposes which the academics, the teachers, the practitioners, the people who know about teaching can build materials and structures into. So in the past we had a national curriculum which was very structured, gave a very firm framework, and you had to meet all these areas. Now there are 4 purposes which the curriculum identifies that schools should develop, and it's been left up to individual schools to develop their own curriculum. And if I can, because I can't remember them off by heart, but you know, the purpose of every school and settings curriculum is to support our children and young people, so the Welsh Government say, to be ambitious, capable learners, ready to learn throughout their lives. And we've talked about lifelong learning for ages, but you know, we're never too old to learn. And secondly, which is the one that I'd like to focus on, is to be enterprising, creative contributors, ready to play a full part in life and work. So, you know, we need to be focusing on how do we support the teachers and staff in schools and colleges to do that. The third one, I'll just go quickly through the other 2, ethical, informed citizens of Wales and the world. And lastly, healthy, confident individuals ready to lead fulfilling lives as valued members of society. I think they're all laudable aims. And it's been rolled out through primary schools already. So all primary schools should have developed curriculum within their school to meet those purposes. And for secondary schools, then that should be completed by 2026. So what we need to be able to do is to support the staff in being able to deliver. I know from personal experience, my daughter and son-in-law are both teachers, that teachers are having to be very creative, you know, in terms of the resources that they use anyway. So, you know, if we can provide and support and help them, and that's been done by a number of ways. So, for example, we're very fortunate in Swansea to have some really excellent people who are working in the arena of education and enterprise. So we have people like Supu, who's developed To Be Enterprising, and they've got the Bumbles of Honeywood, who we go to schools and talk to the children about developing some of the skills that we're talking about, you know, networking or being creative or whatever it is. And that's also combining engagement from the business community, which is very interesting. So a business would sponsor a school, but also then would provide an individual to go in to talk about, you know, what their subject matter is and how that works in the real world.
Reality,
and we're talking about sort of dealing with youngsters, maybe sort of 5 to 8 year olds and that sort of thing. It's fantastic to be one of the highlights of my year last year, so going into some of the schools and seeing that. So we have that. We have also Young Business Dragons, which Sue has been involved in developing, which has been a competition across schools in Neath Talbot, Swansea, right through to Pembrokeshire in the past, and they have heats and support during the year to then have a final competition to see which school comes up with the best idea, and so some of the ideas again are fantastic. And then we have in University of Wales Trinity St David. So for you know, that sort of area, they were the European Entrepreneurial University of the Year. Not many people would know that, you know, because and that was last year. And you've got people like Andy and Kath Penaluna, who are sort of well known and world experts. Andy, for example, has been employed by national governments to advise on the creation of structures for enterprise education. And then we have within Swansea University a very active way of developing entrepreneurial activities, and that's been recognised by a guy by the name of David Bolton, who's the president of the International Enterprise Educators Conference this year. So we've got an awful lot going for us in Swansea. And I think that's been one of my aims last year as Lord Mayor in particular, is to fly that flag a bit more. So I spoke at the conference for the IWC, took place in Swansea University, so I was able to give a welcome to them at that point. March this year I was able to invite all of the key players in enterprise education up to the Mansion House, just to sort of bring them together. And in the past I've chaired a group which is called BEES, BWES, and that stands for Building Enterprise Education in Swansea. So, and that's where we've developed that kind of structure through from primary schools to further education to higher education, in order to see that youngsters can have those entrepreneurial skills developed all the way through, and there's some sort of progression. So it's been a great joy for me, because you probably noticed that nothing I've said has actually involved me doing anything.
Wow!
it's actually bringing people together.
Which is really important, I guess, because it is about that ecosystem, basically, and that's what it sounds like. Swansea has a real ecosystem for entrepreneurship. So.
It does, and I mean that's evidenced in different ways. Like, for example, with students from Gower College Swansea have been going into schools in the past to support their entrepreneurial activities. So you've got that kind of cross-sector engagement and support taking place, and more than anything, we've got that sort of almost professional learning community in entrepreneurial education here within Swansea. So we've seen sort of significant developments and changes, and that's been recognised nationally. So Alison Williams, who's a head teacher at Craigvelin School in Clydach, she was awarded the MB a couple of years ago for her work with enterprise and community activities. So we do have a lot to be proud of, and a lot to talk about in terms of enterprise education. But the most important thing is, what impact does that have on the lives of children and young people? And again, we've got some wonderful stories of how them being engaged in this sort of thing has turned their lives around.
I think that's excellent to hear, because I think, sometimes we do focus on sort of like, the negatives, but then I think it's really important to platform all these amazing things that are happening in Swansea. One thing that was just ringing in my mind, though, is that all seems very localized.
Yes.
How does that sort of fit in with the whole national agenda? Because, for example, GCSEs are still GCSEs, A-levels are still A-levels, everything is just tested still in the same way.
Yes.
So how does that fit in?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, in terms of the national picture, we've been able to influence things. So, for example, the work that was being done with Young Business Dragons, that was taken and run out right across Wales. There's something taking place at the moment where they're trying to replicate what we've been doing here in Swansea right across Wales. But in terms of the impact upon the qualification structures, that's an important thing which is still going on. So, here within Wales, for example, we have the Welsh Joint Education Committee, WJEC, who provide the examination structures, and they need to be able to re-examine, if you pardon the pun, their own assessment. So, a big question which I don't think there's any easy answer to is how do you measure creativity?
Exactly.
Because sometimes it can be kind of a subjective thing. But we have Professor Andy Penaluna, who's been doing a lot of work in that area, and actually sort of challenging people that you can't have a neat structured program, and
because also that's not how the world works in reality.
Right. But I think the other challenge relating to that, Kim, is the fact that if we're developing our own qualifications and so on, how readily recognised they will be for university admission, for example, in England and other places. So if a student's doing GCSEs and A-levels here within Wales, how does that kind of put them in a position to apply for posts and vacant places on university programmes? I mean, we have the Welsh Baccalaureate, which tends to be more cross-cutting.
Yeah.
Because certainly I think A levels haven't changed much in terms of their focus on subjects. Even since my day, where you do sort of 3 A levels, and but the Welsh Baccalaureate does sort of pick up that cross-cutting theme of being able to develop other aspects of the individual's personality and creativity.
Okay, yeah, because I was just thinking in terms of like the students themselves, right? Because you still have to do these qualifications, even though you might have this interest in this bit, but then you're like, actually in reality, if I'm spending my time on this, then how is that helping me? But then I think, again, it just comes back to it being about skills, because you can never, once you've got a skill, right, you can't lose it. I mean, obviously you have to practice it, but then you can't lose it.
No, that's
so
right.
I think it's just reframing your mind in that sense.
It is, and I think the kind of element of entrepreneurial activities come through from things like, for example, it's not just a question of what you teach, but it's how you teach it.
Yes. Yeah.
So it might be that you're even sort of stuck with a subject area, and you have to teach those certain topics. But it's a question of how you do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can be entrepreneurial and creative in that way, both from the teaching point of view, but also from the student's perspective as well.
So how has been sort of the reaction from the teachers, because they are the ones who are delivering some of these activities with the new curriculum?
Yeah.
How do you know, have any idea of how prepared they are?
Yeah, I mean, I'm governor at 2 schools in Swansea, Sketty Primary and Alpha Comprehensive, and I think there's sort of the 2 aspects to that. One was that it has required considerable additional work from the teachers in being able to prepare fresh new curriculum for each school, and rather than being able to take something off the shelf, as it were. I think they've and sometimes I think we do underestimate the work that teachers do, and they, I think, are undervalued. I mentioned earlier on about my daughter and son-in-law being teachers. They're teachers in Germany, and they both have experienced a great deal of respect which is given to teaching profession and teachers in Germany. Whereas my daughter, sort of having taught here in the UK, I won't say which local authority, but was saying that perhaps that isn't exactly the same here in the UK, that people keep saying, no, you've got the long holidays, and so you're only needed in school from 9 till 3, and anybody who knows anything about teaching and education will realise that that is far from the truth.
Exactly.
Evenings, weekends in preparation and marking and supporting youngsters in the development of their careers.
Okay, so we've spoken a bit about young people all the way from the age of 5 to A levels. Yeah. But now I want to hear more about what the universities are doing, and actually what else they could be doing to keep their students here in Wales, because I think one main thing that we've been talking about on the Welsh Dream is we get so much talent here in Wales, but then people get their degree or whatever it may be, and then they leave after that. So the brain drain is something that we are definitely facing. So how can universities be changing really to retain people?
I think it's a very important point, because what we find, particularly with students, is that they love being here, particularly within Swansea, but Wales generally, and would love to stay here if they could. It's not an issue purely for universities and colleges.
Okay.
The kind of picture that comes to my mind is if you can imagine a 3-legged stool. Each of those legs must be the same length, otherwise you'd be toppling on them. And those 3 legs are, first of all, is business, secondly is academia, and thirdly is government. So all 3 must be working together in order to ensure that what we're able to do is to provide opportunities for youngsters once they've graduated. I think the only way in which universities might have a direct impact on the brain drain is that I do know of a number of students who've done likes of PhDs and so on. They'd love to stay here within Swansea. They're offered postdoc posts, and most of those are on a short-term temporary contract. It's a real challenge for universities, isn't it? Because they can't make people permanent unless they know that the funding's in place. But unless the post is permanent, if a youngster then is saying they wouldn't necessarily want to stay here if they're offered a job elsewhere, the southeast of England, for example. As I've kind of intimated, I've experienced that with my daughter and also with my son, who both left the area because there weren't the opportunities here. So how do we actually create those opportunities? And it's being able to use all of those three working in concert to be able to say, well, from the universities and colleges perspective, are we providing the right level of skills and the right type of knowledge that is needed in the local community? The businesses themselves to be articulate and saying, can we have youngsters who are more like this, or but also to say, offering internships or maybe even summer jobs so that youngsters can have the experience, and then the policy of the government being able to support businesses in terms of being able to recruit and retain the talent that we have here. But I think one thing that has been apparent over the recent years is that maybe people who've been from this area have moved elsewhere, developed a great deal of experience, expertise, and in some cases set up businesses and actually starting to come back. There is that kind of umbilical cord.
Well, it's beautiful, right? Wales is beautiful.
Apart from the weather, but so I think from that point of view, there isn't one. There's no silver bullet. I think it's a question of everybody working together in order to achieve that. But I do believe in education. When I was cabinet member, one of my mantras was that I felt that education was the key that unlocked the door to opportunity. And in order to ensure that the opportunities, it's a question of sort of saying, so where are the opportunities? Who can create those opportunities? How can we ensure? But I think also it's a question of being able to say to youngsters, well, how about setting up a business? How about staying here and creating a business? And that leads us on to a whole different discussion, I think, actually, Kim, in terms of what can we be doing within Swansea and within Wales to support and encourage people to set up and establish their businesses here.
No, I think that's where I was literally going to ask you as well, because I think find it's one thing not having opportunities, but then again you can actually create that opportunity for yourself. But then there's also sometimes a lot of barriers that are in place for people where again it's even starting from the point where they don't even see it as a viable thing for themselves. So how do we move people who are sort of furthest from being entrepreneurial to that place where they can actually start up their own business?
I think a lot of it's to do with attitude as well. Not the attitude necessarily of the individual, but the attitude of the society.
Right.
How do we view failure? And we've got some examples, haven't we, of people in the past of who've seen maybe failures. I mean, I was looking at something just recently where Elon Musk with the SpaceX, the first 3 Falcon failures could have easily put him off. But then there were 2 further successes, and on the basis of his experience and their experience, what he said was that they didn't treat it as failures, those first 3. They were able to learn from those and to make the other launches successful. I mean, I hadn't realised, for example, that there'd been something like over 292 launches of SpaceX.
Me too.
And only 2 failures out of that 292, so 99% success rate. But what would have happened if Elon Musk and his fellows said on the basis of the first 3 failing, do you know what, that's enough, I mean, we can't go any further. But what they saw it as learning opportunities. So I think, we have to individually and as a society, I believe, have a different attitude towards failures, which I would say is learning opportunities rather than failures. And secondly, is linked to that is being able to celebrate success. Being able to sort of say, well done. It's easy to be kind of envious of others who've made a good success in their career or business. But we need to be able to kind of celebrate that. So I think those are kind of they're the more touchy-feely things that perhaps are quite difficult to kind of get through, but I think
so
media, politicians. Anyway.
I'm just thinking how important is, because sometimes, especially if you're really passionate or driven by something, when you fail at it, you've given your heart, your soul, everything to it, and then it keeps on failing. That does knock people down. So I'm just thinking how people can sort of reframe their thinking around that still.
I think that's really difficult, and one of the most important parts of that though is the support group around that individual. Are they in an environment where they can sort of talk to others about the fact that, well, this didn't work. You know, what can we do to make it better next time? You know, I'm really depressed about this, and for others to say, well, you know, yeah, but try again. You know, there's kind of many examples. You know, Edison, when he invented the light bulb, he said it wasn't 1,000 failures, it was 1,000 ways of knowing how not to design and create a light bulb. You know, so you know, there is an element of kind of personal resilience.
Exactly.
But I think, you know, kind of having support networks around you is so important, and that's where, you know, organisations like CAE come into play as well, because you know, if people can come in and say, you know, this is the kind of idea, to have a kind of a sounding board, and to say, well, if things don't work out, you know, what can I do differently next time?
No, I think that's spot on, because I think especially it's really crucial in those first stages, you know, to just have someone to push you along, because I think we've had experience of people coming in and maybe they've spoken to a few people and people will shut their idea down. So they're coming and, you know, their confidence is just ruined basically. So I think, it's just important surrounding yourself with the right people.
Yeah, and I think, again, coming back to something I said earlier on, it's not necessarily what the message says, but how the message is portrayed as well. You know, if people get the feeling, well, I'm totally useless, I can never make a success of this, rather than saying, well, yes, it didn't work, let's look at the reasons why it didn't work, what can you do differently next time? So having somebody who's a useful mentor, somebody who's maybe got some experience, being able to support that individual or those individuals, and also I think very importantly is having somebody who can undertake some of the work of if I can call it kind of signposting. One of the things I was looking at, for example, is the plethora of support mechanisms and grants and aid that's available, and for a small business, that's really confusing. You know, how am I going to have time to explore what's available, what suits me, if I'm trying to get my business off the ground.
Day to day, exactly.
And that's where, I mean, so that was my kind of role within the university when I was supporting businesses in the life science sector, is being able to say, so what is it that you're wanting to do? You know, what do you need to grow your business? And then for me to go away and to identify the sources of help, and then bring them back to the individual businesses, because they didn't have the time, because they were too busy doing the business. From that point of view, it's a question of being able to say, you know, you need somebody to undertake that role, and somebody, dare I say it, who's not got a vested interest. What I mean by that is that you know, sometimes you get people who might say, oh yeah, well, I'll help you, but you've got to give me so much percentage, a bit like Dragon's Den, you know, so give me sort of 20% of your business or something like that. But if we have people, and there are lots of good people around who are able to kind of just walk alongside individuals who are not, I wouldn't say struggling, but, you know, having difficulties in setting up their business.
One thing that was just coming to my mind is with business, you know, because you can create your own competition sometimes. So how do you also like tread that carefully in terms of knowing who to trust and who not to trust? Because also sometimes you need to protect your idea, because it could, you know, it's one of those things. It
is, and that's a really difficult thing actually, Kim, because you need to be able to have supportive networks around you, but as you say, it all comes back down to trust in terms of, you know, who. And there are practical things that you can do as an individual, and, you know, it's not just a question of sort of coming up with an idea and saying, oh, it'll be on the marketplace next week. It does require a lot of hard work in doing the preparation beforehand, in terms of saying, so, you know, who is my customer? Where is my market? Who else is working within that sphere? You know, why would people buy from them, or why would people buy from me and not from them? Being able to sort of say, well, where am I going to get that funding? How much is it going to cost? I mean, some of the ideas that people might have are going to be really workable and useful. Others then, you know, you might think, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, sort of years ago, I thought I was going to invent windscreen wipers for glasses. Well, yeah, great, you know, but, you know, who's going to buy it? How can you actually get them made? You know, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a brilliant idea. Particularly in Swansea. So, you know, but
on a day like this.
So, I mean, you have to go through kind of a structured approach in terms of and be open to be challenged. And a phrase that often used is critical friend.
Yes.
Yes. You want somebody who's going to be equally balanced. A friend has to be supportive, but critical
when you need it. Yeah.
Ask you the questions, the difficult questions of so when are you going to do this? Who's going to make that for you? How much is that going to cost? So you need somebody who can do that. You can protect your ideas through various mechanisms, through intellectual property, either copywriting or patenting or whatever it is. But again, the idea of supporting an individual developing the idea, and you do need to have trust in individuals who are going to be able to undertake that role for you.
Definitely. So we've spoken a bit about what's important to help someone be entrepreneurial in that sense, the personal bits. Is there anything else that you think can be done? Because we're talking about opportunities and bringing entrepreneurship as an opportunity for people to stay. What else do you think in that space?
Yeah, I think, again, going back to what I said about each of the elements of the three-legged stool working together, I think from a government point of view, it's providing the environment which will be constructive and helpful. I don't like the term incubator. Okay. When you talk about a business incubator, only from the point of view that if you think of an incubator within a hospital setting, it's for something which is near death, isn't it? Or needs support for life. So teetering on the edge, as it were. So we're not in that sort of situation with businesses, are we? I mean, it maybe a phrase of like a greenhouse would be more effective in terms of sort of saying, well, trying to encourage something which is just a little seed to be able to grow and so on. But you do need the individuals to water it and to care for the plant and to provide the right temperature and so on. Yeah. And we need to be able to look to organisations and policies from the government who can provide those sorts of environments. I still find, I think I mentioned earlier on about the difficulty of so many different schemes being available. Who do I go to for support? Where can I find support in this particular area? And having a place where people can just come to talk to an individual or a group of individuals and to say, what do you think about this, and where should I go next? That's so important. Kind of a relaxed area, informal maybe, but also kind of structured in terms of being able to signpost people to help. Challenge there for government is how do you fund that? And I know that we've really missed out, I think, through, I don't want to get political, but with Brexit, European Union funding is disappearing, and we need to be thinking in terms of what resources can we bring to bear. But there can be sort of voluntary types of organisations and as I mentioned earlier on, I do believe that CAE has a real role in this, in being able to kind of help, not just in terms of advice and so on, but practical ways in terms of transport and so on, which people might find that they don't have access to, and which could be a real barrier for them to develop their business. Yeah,
definitely. But I think funding is still a main challenge for a lot of people. Even though I know you've mentioned there's a lot of schemes, but then funding and money to just seed money basically is a challenge for a lot of people, especially if it's people who are migrants, for example, right? They haven't grown up in Wales, they don't have family that they can call upon for lend me £5,000 or whatever it is. So it's still a big problem that a lot of people face. And again, I think that's where the whole government thing comes in. But then we've also mentioned they've got their own issues as well, so it's just one of those circular things.
It is. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier on about Sue Poole. One of the ideas that she came up with and which we were able to do was actually a seed fund. So for young people and students who had an idea. I mean, it wasn't a question of sort of giving money to everybody, but sort of looking at what their idea was through support of a group of individuals with experience, saying, well, that's a flyer. So we'll give you some support and see how it goes.
Exactly.
But also, I must admit that there had to be the recognition that sometimes, going back to what I said earlier, that business would fail.
Yeah.
And being able to sort of say, so why didn't it work? What would you do differently next time? And how can we support you in that next phase?
on that failure bit, actually, I think I know we touched on it briefly, but then what is calculated risk? Like, how does a person actually take that risk on something?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things really, Kim, on that. One is that you never know, because none of us have a crystal ball, and we can't look into the future. We don't know what market changes are going to take place and how that would impact upon a business. But having said that, there are kind of risk assessments that you can do in advance of going through. So, having that kind of critical friend earlier on, sort of saying, so, asking some of the difficult questions. So, what's your product or your service? Who are your customers? How are you going to get your product or service to your customers? How much is it going to cost? And what are the competitors? Those sorts of things. There is a kind of a checklist. I know people talk about having to develop a business plan.
I'm not a fan.
I'm not a sort of total fan of the business plan itself,
right?
Because quite often the business plan is written, lovely document, 50 pages long, put on the shelf.
Yeah.
But what people miss, I think, in that process, Kim, is thinking through.
Yeah. Okay.
What has led to that final document, and it's that sort of thinking through some of the issues, which is the important part of it, not the final product of the business plan. So that would be my kind of view, is saying that this is what we need to be doing in terms of helping people to not entirely eliminate the risk, but to de-risk the business idea and the development of the business as much as you can. As I say, we're all subject to external factors, things that we have no control over, like the increase in price of oil, for example, and what that means in terms of petrol costs, and if you relied upon transport, what that means in terms of your own business, and that could ride a coach and horses through your own profit and loss estimates in the future. So, I think it's being able to kind of do as much as you can, but also sort of monitoring and keeping a control of what's going on in the business at the time as well.
So, Mike, in your opinion, what do you think are the opportunities that exist for Swansea right now, but also in the future?
Yeah, I think we must, when we look at the future, have some eye to the past.
Okay.
Swansea, as you know, was very heavily dependent upon industry in the past, and that has been a major structural change in that we're no longer reliant upon major organisations and primary industries. And even recent announcements about the future of Tata in Port Talbot sort of highlights the fact that we can't rely upon those sorts of issues. I know that when many years ago there was a large steel plant which closed down just north of Swansea, and the site was cleared, and I think a lot of people were still thinking that they would be able to attract a large organisation of business to come there and set up and create many thousands of jobs. And I think that it's important for us to realise that things have changed significantly, so we're much more dependent upon individuals, small businesses coming up with ideas, some of which will take off. I think things like, for example, the AU vodka experience is just amazing how that's flourished and got a global presence. But there will be, it's a pyramid, isn't it? Of, whilst you have those organisations and businesses who've done really, really well, there will be many others who are doing well, supporting that, and below that in terms of not able to have necessarily a national or international presence, but certainly having an impact upon what's going on here. Having said that, there's a lot of work that's been done in universities to create businesses through in the IT sector, being able to see individuals come up with new programs. I think the opportunities of AI need to be explored a bit more. Whilst it's being talked about nationally and maybe internationally, I haven't heard much of it being talked about here locally within Swansea.
No, that's true.
There's we've got organisations who are looking at how we can be supporting businesses, but I think there's a need for those to be focusing on some of those newer developments. And what is AI? What are the advantages, disadvantages, threats, opportunities? Being able to kind of say, what can we be doing here? both in terms of, going back to my three-legged stool, I'm sorry.
That's the basis of this conversation.
What can the universities and colleges be doing
Yeah.
to support students in developing those skills? What can businesses themselves be doing and learning from the universities in that regard? What can government be doing in terms of saying, this is our approach and this is how we're going to deal with AI?
Since you've mentioned it, actually, what potential do you think AI can bring in the whole space of entrepreneurship then?
Well, it's amazing, really, because I think, when I talked earlier on about developing business plans and so on, then I believe that AI could help the small business person, setting up or startup, being able to develop their business plan.
It's like another person.
It is. And again, we mustn't put total reliance on it.
Yeah.
But it does provide you with a basis on which you can finalise and sign off on a document, a business plan, maybe even a bid for funding. Hearing organisations already now who are using AI to develop their applications for funding. That there are those opportunities, but I think also in terms of being able to deliver services and products. Being able to come up with suggestions for ways in which customers would be best serviced or supported. So I think AI does have a considerable potential for us. And then the challenge is, as I mentioned earlier on, is how do schools deal with it? The positives are that it provides a much more powerful tool for being able to help students to learn. There can be perhaps a challenge in terms of too much reliance by the students on AI, and rather than going through the thinking processes, because it's a thinking, it's just using that and coming up with a final product. So, much to be discussed. Yeah. But like with anything else, we talk about sort of all sorts of things in the past, don't we? I mean, fire can be positive, but as we've seen, it can be really negative 100%. And destructive. Nuclear power can be positive, but it can be very destructive. And again, we need to think in terms of AI. How do we harness the positive elements of it and minimise the destructive elements of it?
No, 100%. I think that's spot on. And then, in terms of Wales as a greater sort of looking at it from a greater point of view. What do you think are the opportunities that lie in Wales for entrepreneurship? Yeah,
well, again, because of the fact that we are such a kind of rural, tourism-oriented nation, we do have opportunities for encouraging much more creative tourism as well. And maybe using AI, for example, to come up with individuals being given on their iPhone a tourist route.
Some sort of interactive.
So there are mechanisms that can be used from that perspective. I think we need to recognise that we need to be moving people from a state of kind of dependency to independency to try and encourage people in that regard. So we've talked about grants and loans and things of that nature, which are all really good, but we can't allow a business or a country to continue to be supported by funding coming in all the time.
Yes.
At some point, with the business, you must move from a dependency on loans and grants to being able to be self-sustaining.
Exactly. If you've got a viable business, then you should be sustainable.
Well, exactly. So, and we see that sort of parallel. I would see that parallel with the country as well. Is that we need to be able to be paying our way rather than just simply relying upon individuals being able to provide some sort of funding from outside.
Amazing. I think we've touched on loads of amazing things.
It's been really interesting. So thank you, Kim.
Thank you. I guess before we close, could you share with us what your Welsh Dream is?
And it was a really interesting question, and I suppose I had the fortune of last year being Lord Mayor and thinking about, so what did I want people to see being the legacy of the year of me being Lord Mayor. And I suppose it was based upon two phrases. The first one, which is I confess to being a plagiarist here.
Okay. All right, well allowed.
Thank you. Is the motto of Swansea.
Right.
Now, I don't know how many people would remember what the motto of Swansea is, but it's Floreat Swansea,
Okay.
which was, again, looking back at the history, maybe identified in 1922, so just over 100 years ago, as being something which had been developing throughout the years. Floreat Swansea, the Latin phrase meaning let Swansea flourish or grow or prosper.
Love that.
And that's all our hearts really, for not just Swansea but for Wales, to see us to be able to prosper economically, socially, culturally, spiritually, sporting wise. So that would be our kind of aspiration, and trying to sort of say to people, yes, this is what we want to see. We want to see Swansea doing well. We want to see Wales doing well. And linked with that is the other phrase that I developed was growing hope.
Okay.
Growing hope. Because I think particularly during coming out of COVID, people were feeling quite bereft and stressed and sometimes a little bit lost and wondering about what the future's going to hold. We're going to be facing another pandemic in the near future, the economic crisis coming, and so on and so forth. And it's not a kind of something which is wishy-washy, but the fact that we need to be able to help people to develop a sense of hope, that there is a better future, there is something that we can be working together on, and that's where I believe that it needs us all to be working together to be able to develop an entrepreneurial, creative approach to the problems that we face, so that we can together work through those situations which have really badly affected us in the past. So, two things really: Floreat Swansea and growing hope.
Two beautiful things. There's really no better way to end that. So thank you so much, Mike, for your time today.
Thank you, Kim.
Really enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.